Hello and welcome to this video and to December's book review. I'm really cold, hence the hoodie, so I thought I'd just be comfortable and film it in this today. December was a rather festive reading month for me. I read Christmas-based books, so in total I read 6 books, which is up there, but I'm not sure one of them actually counts as a book, let's be honest, and 3 of them were middle grade, so that's why it was easy to get through. You may notice that my shelf is looking much fuller, and that's because I was lucky and got a few books for Christmas, plus was able to go and rummage through the books at my dad's church again, which if you've seen some of my other videos you'll know I do occasionally, although I won't be able to anymore. That was probably my last trip to do that. But this is a thing for another video if I ever choose to do my TBR, which I'm not sure about. If you're interested, put it in the comments below. But we are here to talk about December's reading and the Christmas books. I think, although I'm not going to quite go in the order that I read them because I basically read a series of Christmas books, so I thought we'd talk about those in one go and then we'll go into the rest. So I read the Christmasaurus books by Tom Fletcher. So I read the Christmasaurus and the Winter Witch, and the Christmasaurus and the Naughty List. I'm aware there's a 4th one, which I wouldn't mind getting my hands on for next Christmas. But in the Christmasaurus, we're following our Christmasaurus. He is a dinosaur. His egg gets buried in the ice, and then long time later, the elves in the North Pole find him and he hatches and stuff like that. But he's very lonely, so he sneaks into Santa's sleigh on one Christmas Eve and finds himself with a young boy called William Trundle, and together they go on an adventure and help save Christmas. William Trundle is a wheelchair-based character, but it isn't actually a big deal in the story. It's really good representation for that, because although he's in a wheelchair, he's disabled, he doesn't come across as like a needy kid, or it's not a sad story, it's just a fact. He's just in a wheelchair. He's a normal kid who just happens to be in a wheelchair, which I think is a really good way of having it in this age group of book, and is one that I do look forward to reading with Eloise as she gets older. I do think it will be a good December book for us to pick up. One thing reading all of these did raise for me is there are so many conflicting stories about Santa Claus, Father Christmas, whichever you want to call him, and I've now been trying to work out how I'm going to tackle that, because this has a slightly different lore to it than other things that I've read or seen and that kind of stuff. So something for me to think about as Eloise gets older. Not really in the frame here, am I? Let's shift over. There we go. And I like the fact that it breaks the 4th wall, it includes the reader, and those things are the bits that made me laugh most. And the illustrations in this book are by far, I'm trying to find a good one of the Christmasaurus. There you go. The illustrations in this book are by far, like, they make it. Like, Shane DeVries is an incredible illustrator, and in all of these that is a highlight for me. So the Christmasaurus is my favourite of the 3 that I have read. Would recommend the Christmasaurus. The Christmasaurus and the Winter Witch is not quite as good. We are following the same characters, but our cast is extended slightly, and we head back to the North Pole ahead of Christmas, and there's this whole like time travel element, and again the Christmasaurus and William have to save Christmas. The characters in it are still enjoyable. I liked the characters in it. The writing is still really good. The illustrations are still brilliant. And I actually preferred the baddie in this one. I didn't like the antagonist that we had in this quite as much, although it did make sense towards the end. It just sort of felt like they needed a baddie, for this one, whereas this was integral to the story and I enjoyed that part a lot more. But I didn't like the time travel element of this book. I found it made it a bit clunky and a bit disjointed, and it just wasn't quite as well put together as a story because of that, in my opinion. And if you've read this, I have no idea how they would take Brenda after what is in this story for her, so that's a strange way of taking it. So yeah, not as good, still enjoyable, I'd still keep it. This was a 4-star, this was a 3.5, so it's not dissimilar, but I think for me, just because of the time travel, it made it a bit clunky and disjointed. That's why I was less keen on it. And the third one is the Christmasaurus and the Naughty List. Again, this is a very different take on different to the other 2 books. We are solely with the Christmasaurus in this one, and it's a bit more like short stories, where he is travelling to different children to help them come off the naughty list ahead of Christmas Eve. So, and one of those children is William, but he does not make a big part in this book. This one comes in a second, so my order is the Christmasaurus, this one, and then the Winter Witch, because I do like the little stories of the Christmasaurus, but they did get a little bit repetitive because essentially it is, we meet a child who is being naughty, and then the Christmasaurus helps them get better and become on the nice list. So it did lack that sort of partnership between the Christmasaurus and William a bit for me. It obviously does have a whole lot of lessons of being kind and about acceptance and that kind of thing, which again is good for this age group, and it being repetitive might not be as frustrating for them as it was for me as an adult reader. I wanted something else, but it being repetitive might help that message sink in for your 8 to 11-year-olds, which I think this is what it's aimed at. Although I would say younger end of that. But does it hold the kids to a high standard? Because some of this stuff is like, she doesn't eat her vegetables. Well, I'm an adult that doesn't eat fruit, so does that put me on the naughty list? I do eat vegetables, but I don't eat fruit. So am I on the naughty list because of that, or not? So I'm not sure whether the standard that this book is setting out for children, although some of the things seem small, is a bit unachievable for the normal human being, shall we say. But I did like it nonetheless, and there is a character in this, very brief, not a major character, called Peter Thompson, which is my husband's name, so that was fun. So yeah, I did enjoy the series, would like to get the next one ahead of next Christmas. Do think that they went downhill slightly with these 2, but I've heard good things about A Christmasaurus Carol, I think it's called. I'm really glad that I've read these this year, and as I said, definitely keeping them because I think they'll be good ones to read with Eloise as she grows up. Now, I interspersed the Christmasaurus books with some other smaller, thinner, shorter books. So the second book I actually read in the month was Twas the Nightshift Before Christmas by Adam Kay, which I borrowed from the library because I wanted to try that system out of like placing a hold and it coming in just to see how it works ahead of this year, because you may have heard in other videos, I can't remember how many I've mentioned it in, but I've joined a book club for 2025, and my hope is to be able to get those books from the library rather than paying the extra for that book club to get given the book. Our first read is actually on my Kindle, so I don't need to use the library for that one, but in future months I'm hoping to use the library, so I wanted to check out the system to see how easy and how long and all of that kind of stuff. So that's why I read this book. That's a long-winded reason as to why I read it, but this is like a novella-y kind of thing to go with. This is, what's the book called? This is Going to Hurt, but this is based solely around the Christmases that Adam Kay worked in the NHS and stories around that. I read earlier in the year, was it November actually? It might have been November, so only the month before, I read Undoctored, which is what happened after This Is Going to Hurt and him leaving, and I didn't like that one quite so much. I missed the hospital stories, and this one had those, so I was glad to be back with those. And what I think Adam Kay does really well is mixing those stories that make you laugh about someone that that's stuck a turkey baster up the bum or something like that. I don't think that was the story, but you know the kind of gist that I'm getting at, along with the ones that actually make you really sad and make you think. And he does a really good balance of both of those, and it really did get me to think about, not that I'd never thought about it before, but the sacrifice that health professionals and people that have to work at Christmas do make so that others can just go ahead and enjoy the festivities. And it's something I wouldn't be able to do. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do the job in general, but certainly at Christmas I think I'd find it really hard. So yeah, I did enjoy it. It was short, it is just a novella, but it was a nice way to have a completely separate thing from the Christmasaurus in between the two books, so I didn't feel overloaded with Christmasaurus, but also managed to have something else, and it was a good addition to my reading this month, and I enjoyed it. So that was Twas the Nightshift Before Christmas by Adam Kay. So much earlier in the year, sort of around March, April time, after I'd had Eloise, so she was very young, I'd gone through all of my books and basically written the page countdown, and I found that I had another novella that was based around Christmas that was like 50 pages. Actually, I think it was less. I think it was like 30 pages, and I thought, I might as well read that one this December, get that one off my Kindle. It's another one of those ones that's been on there since like 2012 when I got my Kindle. You see, I've read a few of those again this year, so I thought I'll read that. This one was called In a New York Minute by Eleanor Moran, and it was completely and utterly pointless. There was... So on the Kindle book, it stopped at 46%. That shows you how little there was to this. It's deemed as a romance. It's set on Christmas Eve. I can't really tell you what it's about without giving you everything, but there's a woman. She's trying to finish up a advert job so that she can get home for Christmas. But in 46% of a Kindle book and about 30 pages, there's not a lot of story, nor is there any romance to it. And I just don't really get the point of it and why it was there. It's almost like she wrote a chapter and that was it. And maybe that is the case. Maybe I've just read the first chapter of a book and that was on the Kindle thing. But yeah, it wasn't a novella. It wasn't a fully fleshed story. Why was she making a cat food commercial on Christmas Eve? I don't know. There was a lot about her past relationship, but then there was no story, so there was no point to it. And the only reason it's based as a Christmas book is because it was set on Christmas Eve, but there was nothing festive about it. As I said, it's based around a cat food commercial, and her old relationship. So there are so many unanswered questions. Don't really understand why it's a thing. Wouldn't recommend. So yeah, In a New York Minute by Eleanor Moran. Would advise you don't even bother looking at it. So the last book that I read in December was The Perfect Fit by Mary Jane Baker. This is a romance set in a panto, so that's why I've saved it for December. It's more sort of Christmas adjacent than Christmas itself. Pantos are obviously for the season, but don't necessarily feature all of the Christmassy stuff that you might want. This is a very easy romance to read. I like these kind of books to have for the actual Christmas period because you don't get quite as much time to read as I would beforehand, and they're very easy to just dip in, read a couple of chapters and dip out again. So I tend to try and have something like this on my TBR for that week in particular, particularly as we tend to be seeing lots of family and stuff like that as well. In this we are following Becky. She's just moved back to her village in the Yorkshire Dales. She's trying to make friends and fit back in. So in doing so, she joins the village committee who are struggling to keep their village hall open. And as that was a big lifeline to her as a child, she wants to do everything that she can to save it, which is why she comes up with the idea of reintroducing the village panto. And we follow that story as that comes into fruition. Alongside that, there is her love interest in the panto, Marcus, but she also has a fiance called Cole who is moving up to London. I understand the choice of having Cole and having her have a fiance. That does make sense, but it also didn't make sense in the book because it was a bit of an afterthought. The panto quite obviously has forefront in this book, but that was a bit of an afterthought, so it sort of did feel like it was only there for a plot point, for a plot story. It didn't feel like it was a natural thing that was happening in this book. But that being said, I did like pretty much all the characters. They were all fun, they were all a cast of characters, and I could definitely see someone like Emilia Clarke playing Becky in some sort of film, and the setting would be cool and that kind of stuff. I would say that the ending is probably a bit too drawn out for my liking. We have 2 third act breakups, I think, but they're basically the same thing, so we could have done without one of those. I mean, it's not a particularly long book, we're about 350 pages, which is very standard for this kind of romance, but I think we probably could have lost a bit of that. There was a bit of flab, shall we say, in it. It is also part of a series. I believe this is book 2, but it can definitely be read as a standalone. I wouldn't be adverse to reading the first one in this series, but I'm also not going to go out my way to find it. So enjoyable, did like it, did like the whole panto thing, never read a romance in a panto, would happily read one of those again. But some of the storylines and some of that felt a bit shoehorned, and it's not one I'll be keeping on my shelves, but did enjoy the opportunity to read it. So that's The Perfect Fit by Mary Jane Baker, and the last book that I read in December and in 2024. So overall the month was pretty good. I got through quite a good chunk of books from this shelf, which is helpful because I have added quite a few books to the shelf. And it was also probably my second highest reading month. I think January and December like bookended my reading is like the highest months, January for obvious reasons, and December because I read short books and kids books mainly. But the year as a whole actually turned out pretty decent for reading, which I wasn't sure about going in because obviously I was having a baby and I didn't know how that would impact things, it being my first and all. But in the end I read 66 books, which I think is pretty good going. My goal is always 52, so I exceeded that. And apparently that spans across 20,691 pages according to my story graph. And if you want to see a video about my best and worst books of the year, I have already posted that, so I'll link that up here for you if you're interested in seeing that. But for now I'm going to leave you to it, so if you have any comments about the books I've read or any recommendations for Christmas books that I should pick up for this year, for 2025, put them in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to be continuing these monthly book videos because I enjoy doing them. It gives me the chance to reflect on what I've read and things like that. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!